Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Nightmare Stories, Volume 2, Story Number 1. First, let me say that my family moved from California to Washington State as we bought a house in the country, in the woods. Right before we came up, a little girl went missing in the area. They never found her. One night, my mom was on the phone with her dad when she heard a loud bang on the window. My mom turned to look and saw a man darting away. Our windows were huge, with no curtains. My mom hung up the phone, grabbed me and my brother, and ran to the car. She tried to start it for a good minute, but it wouldn't. Finally, she got it going and got the hell out of there. My brother told her that there was a man waiting by our storage barn and the carport area, and he had started to make his way to the car. She called the cops at the gas station. They searched and never found him. The very next day, she was out in the woods where she found what she looked to be a new grave, a mound. A few feet away, she found a little girl's shoe. Now, let me get on to the paranormal story. The house we moved to was near Spokane, and it was in the country, and we were in the woods. Some years before, a woman had lived there and died in a car accident. Nobody prior to us reported any paranormal activity, but from day one, we always had issues. Boxes and objects would mysteriously move around while we were gone, things like that. Various members of my family reported seeing the woman walking around the house. My older brother saw her going through our fridge, and on other occasions she would walk down the hallway to our pellet stove. My younger brother was a baby at the time and sleeping in his crib when my mom went to check on him, only to find the woman standing over his crib peacefully watching him. She never caused any harm, but it was freaky as hell to turn the corner or into her room and find a very clear figure just hanging out. One day during the summer, my parents were gone at work, and it was me. I was around 4 years old. My older brother, my older sister, and my two cousins at the house. I was in my parents' room watching a Disney sing along tape when I felt a presence behind me. So naturally, I turned around to look towards the closet. The same woman we would always see was standing there, not moving, watching me. I knew she was around but had never seen her myself, and honestly didn't even believe in ghosts or paranormal things until I saw her. I have never been so freaked out before. I stared for what felt like forever, but in reality it was probably 2 seconds. I was scared, shitless, and I screamed the loudest I've ever screamed before. I was frozen, I couldn't move. When my family came running, they found me curled up in the same spot I'd been in, crying, pointing to the corner. By this time the woman had vanished. I never saw her again after that, and had honestly forgotten the whole thing happened until one day one of my cousins brought it up a few years ago. When she mentioned it, everything came rushing back, and I remembered every detail. Story number 2. Around 1997 or 98, my family and I took a trip to Douglas, Arizona to bury my great-grandfather after he died. We stayed at the Gadsden Hotel, as is tradition when there's a death on my dad's side of the family. The Gadsden is a pretty historic hotel. It first opened its doors in 1907, burned to the ground in 1912, and then was rebuilt and reopened in 1929. There's been a number of ghost stories about ghosts and strange sightings in the hotel, to the point that the most cited of the apparitions even has a name, the Gadsden Ghost. However, I don't know if I ever saw him, but I'll tell you what I did see. On the west side of the hotel, there is a manual service elevator that leads from the back entrance of the hotel and the kitchen to the upper levels. My oldest brother and I were out exploring the hotel around 9 or 10 p.m. while our parents and family were giving my great-grandfather a proper wake in the hotel bar. We went up to the top floor, scoured the stairs and hallway, went into open rooms, pretty much anything we could get into. Well, we discovered the service elevator on the fifth floor and thought it was old looking. We decided to ride it down to the first floor, for laughs and junk. The elevator worked without issue and took us down to the back door kitchen access area, which amounted to a small hallway with a door to the lobby, a door out back, and a stainless steel door with a small round window to the kitchen. Everything looked seemingly normal. We could hear crickets chirping outside, a few latecomers wandering around the lobby, and a bustling staff working in the kitchen. We peered through the window in the kitchen door just to see what was going on from the elevator. I wasn't quite tall enough at that point to see through the windows, and being the curious little brother, I wanted to go in for a closer look. So I pushed past my older brother and opened the door. It was empty. The kitchen was totally empty. When I opened the door and looked in, the lights were off and the kitchen was empty. No cooks, no staff, no waiters. Nothing but silence. A chill went down my spine as my brother and I stared into the emptiness in astonishment. There was no mistake. We've both seen the same thing through the window and both seen the same thing through the open door. And it haunts us both to this day. I mean, let's face it, a haunted kitchen in a rebuilt, burnt down historic hotel. Next story. When I was 6, we moved from New York City to a farm in rural County Kerry, Ireland. The farm belonged to my grandparents. It had been in my grandfather's family for almost 2 centuries. A new 2-story stone farmhouse had been built on the footprints of the old cottage in 1937. My grandmother, Mary, moved into that house when she married my grandfather, Dan. Mary was highly superstitious and had an arsenal of ghost and fairy stories that she would tell us children at every opportunity. She was an expert storyteller in the old Irish tradition, and she would terrify us so we couldn't sleep. My mother, her daughter, forbade her, but she took no notice and would tell us anyway. I remember them all. The unbaptized babies buried alongside the ditch of an unconsecrated field, the black hound of Ellis Woods, the mysterious strangers picked up on lonely roads at night only to disappear from the moving car. We stayed at the farm quite regularly, and there was one particular story that terrified me. Mary lived at a time when nursing homes didn't exist. Older relatives were taken care of by the family. They died and were waked in the traditional way at home. 14 bodies and coffins went out the front door of that farmhouse, and nearly as many years up until the late 1950s. The front door was only ever opened for special occasions, such as funerals, weddings, and Stations of the Cross. These activities became less frequent after the early 60s. The back door of the farmhouse led out to the yard and farm buildings. The front door, no longer used, swelled shut. When we came home from New York, the front door was forced open to allow us children access to the large front yard. This was in 1976. In the years after 1960, my mother and her siblings had grown up and moved on. My grandparents now lived alone in the farmhouse. My grandmother would tell us how late at night, when she and Dan were alone, they would hear the apparently sealed shut front door open. Footsteps would climb the stairs and walk through the 5 bedrooms overhead. Then the footsteps would return down the stairs. The owner of the footsteps would open and shut the door behind him. This happened very regularly, yet they never got up to see what it was. All the while, this same front door remained sealed shut from damp. I never witnessed this myself, but when on the upper floors of the house, I always had the sensation of being watched, and the hairs would stand up on my neck. My grandparents are long dead, but the house still stands. To this day, I get that sensation. After my grandparents' death, the farmhouse was fully renovated. The floors had moved off their timber joists, and the years of wallpaper had built up in thick layers. The house was completely gutted. Hidden in the walls and floors, they found many things, including several guns left after the Troubles. My grandfather and his brothers ran guns for the old IRA, as many of his contemporaries did at the time. I think of my childhood on that farm, a life lived in a style now long dead, rich in the traditions of the old Irish ways. I don't believe in ghosts, but I loved my grandparents and I'm grateful to them for so many things. Next story. I worked for a summer in a haunted house type attraction where weird things happen quite often. I only worked on the cash desk, so I didn't have too many odd things happen directly to me. But here is my one spooky story and an addendum from someone who couldn't have been trying to freak me out. It was almost the 4th of July and a firework display happening outside, so we were completely empty. We had the door closed to keep the AC air inside, and the lobby was set up like this. Let's say the cash desk is at 6 o'clock, with the cashier, me, sitting facing into a large square room. There is a CCTV screen on the desk showing the lobby from a camera over my head, the stairs going up into the attraction, the exit passage, and the fire escape at the back. All four shots at once on one four-way split screen. Directly in front of the cash desk was a little gate. Pay your money, and I unlocked the gate using a foot pedal. At 7 o'clock was the exit doorway and stairs from the lobby into the museum. Accessible only if I let you in with my foot pedal and visible on my CCTV. At 7 and 11 o'clock, decor and merchandise behind glass along a wall facing the main door. No entry, no exit. At 11 o'clock is the exit door, which you can open from the inside. The passage on the other side of this door is visible on CCTV. At 12 o'clock is a big noisy animatronic display. At 3 o'clock is the main entrance door. On each side of this door are motion activated animatronics. Nobody goes in or out without those things dancing. The wall from 12 to 6 is glass. Where you can see outside into a big open space, they can see inside. So, anyway, quiet night, and I'm sitting alone at my cash desk in an empty lobby facing into an empty square. The music we played annoyed me with its endless loop. 78 minutes. So, I was in that habit of singing to myself when I was alone in there. This Thursday I was singing, looked up, and there was someone standing across from me, looking at the animatronic display at 12 o'clock. I was mortified. How long had this guy been there listening to my dreadful tone-deaf singing? I put my work face on, smiled, and asked if I could help him with anything. He completely ignored me, and I'm thinking, oh, these tourists. And then repeated, "Can I help you?" Not even a flicker from this man. The oblivious, obnoxious pain in the neck. So I bit my tongue and looked down at my desk, preparing to organize the never-ending bits of paper that seemed to end up there during the day. In doing so, I could still see this guy's jean-clad legs, but I could also see the CCTV of the lobby, and he wasn't on the screen. I focused directly on the screen, not there, and looked back up, but he was no longer in the lobby. If he had gone out of the front door, he would have had to traverse maybe a whole room in 3 seconds, vanished in virtually an empty square outside, and the animatronics would have been dancing. He wasn't out there, and they were still. He had not gone out that way. If he had gone up the entrance stairs, I would have had to let him in with my foot pedal, and I would have been able to see him on the CCTV. He wasn't there. If he had somehow managed to lever open the invisible exit door, it would have taken more than he could possibly have had, and I would have been able to see him in the exit passage on CCTV. He wasn't there. I called in via radio to the guys inside the attraction to let them know I lost sight of a male customer in the lobby, and could they keep their eyes open. Within 5 minutes, one of them comes out and says, "So this guy, was he wearing a cap, jeans, and a plaid shirt?" I reply, "Yes." "And did they find him? Where'd he go?" "I didn't see them take him out back." And he just explains that he's one of the real ghosts, bears a striking resemblance to a former manager, and if he didn't approach me, that is a good thing, that I'm doing my job right, because bad employees tend to end up leaving mid-shift after a frightening encounter. He then tells me that there was allegedly a murder-suicide in the building's history, where a man impregnated his mistress and wanted to marry her, but his wife and daughter were an encumbrance. So he killed them, and overcome with remorse, killed himself. And the staff who worked inside the attraction are fairly sure there are 4 ghosts, not just one. I was patently on ghost overload at this point and wanted more proof before I believed anything at all. It came a couple of nights later when the sweetest little girl I had ever seen comes rushing out of the exit to me, bounced up and down with excitement, and asked how we made the magic. She had been at the Hall of Mirrors, and her reflection had been replaced by that of a little blonde girl in a formal dress and pinafore. Next story. Background. I grew up in a large city in eastern Canada. The whole of my life at that point had been spent around noise and light, traffic, and tides of people. It made the concept of quiet solitude very appealing, and I'd learned to seek these things out and appreciate them whenever I could. So when the opportunity arose to visit my parents' home, I took it. This is because they grew up in the far eastern part of Canada on the island of Newfoundland. Not even from the big city there, but from a small town. One of those towns you can see all of it by standing on the biggest street within it. A remote part of a remote island in a remote country seemed like gold to me, especially at that time in my life. I was in my early 20s. I shotgunned straight out of college, aimed at a career intent on making my mark, but the city I was in wasn't particularly accepting of my skills or the language I spoke, so finding work was difficult and depressing. I gamed a lot more than I should have. I ate more. I drank more. Everyone thought it was a good idea for a change of pace, healthy even. On the trip, I will only describe our descent, for it is the most opportune use of the word I will ever know. If you've never been in a small plane at night, flying above a sea of clouds during a full moon, then you're missing one of the few plane based pleasures available to people in the era of manned flight. It's magical. The sky looked like wet black tarmac and headlight. So many stars there seemed to be more than the sky could hold. Hovering in the middle of them was the spotlight of a moon, almost too bright to look at. These things together lit the rolling clouds beneath the plane. It looked like a pillow stuffing spread out horizon to horizon, all cast in a silver blue light. I felt like I could walk on it, like it was only a few feet below the fuselage. It moved and breathed and changed as we flew over it. It really was a perfect memory. Then we dove down through that perfection into darkness. We arrived at a small airport outside of the hometown. We could have driven from St. John's, but elected not to. Overnight driving into Newfoundland, this is perilous for people not accustomed to small roads and wildlife that still remains mostly wild. If your car hits a moose at 60 kilometers per hour, the moose won't be what gets scraped off the road. We still had some driving to do, though. Their hometown was not where we would be staying, but at a been in the family for years cabin about 30 minutes away, in the woods. My lifestyle back on the mainland, fueled by disappointment and depression, had given me two things I couldn't shake when I landed: a desire to be outside, and a completely screwed up internal clock. I was so used to playing Ultima Online until 4 a.m. every night that 2 a.m. felt pretty early. So when my parents went to bed, I let them know I was going for a walk. They understood, and Newfoundland is not known for violent crimes in the wood, so there was no real concern. I took a flashlight and a walking stick, mostly to avoid turning an ankle and for swatting away any unwanted attention from local fauna. Not that a broomstick, literally, would do much against an aggressive animal, but if you've ever gone walking anywhere not fully tamed, it just feels good to have something solid in your hands. So off I went. Now, ever since our descent, I'd been concerned. This general sense of tension I attributed it to a new place, no real creature comforts except some books, and a lack of computer. Maybe it was just the absence of that amazing scene above the clouds. Whatever it was, that feeling ratcheted up several levels just a few minutes from the house. I shelved it. I figured I'd acclimate shortly, and this was a clearly defined walking path that I knew circled around the small lake next to the cabin and would bring me back right there in a couple of kilometers. Probably 45 minutes into the walk if I kept a good pace, and an hour if it was a bit more casual. The whole way around, I would be able to see the cabin, so I wouldn't lose my orientation. All in all, I'm trying to say I had my bases covered. I even had light, as the moon I'd seen earlier was still overhead, poking out from the overcast sky regularly enough to see. The clouds were fast, as they can be so close to the sea. So I'm walking down the path, woods to my right, big impenetrable pine, and to my left the small lake, lit like glossy black frosted glass by the wind and the moon. Solo walks are great for thinking, so I let my mind wander. The path was well kept, and the stick and flashlight utterly unnecessary. At some indeterminate point in the walk, I felt someone walk over my grave. You know those slow chills when you can feel the wave of goosebumps up here, flowing up your neck, back, forearms, and everything goes tight? I realized I was staring at the lake, at the white house of the reflected light, and not paying attention to the woods. I became irrationally certain that something terrible was in the woods. I flicked on my flashlight as I turned to look, and it was like sinking in a hot tub. The goosebumps vanished, and the woods seemed utterly unremarkable. Mollified, I continued walking. Then it happened again. Exact same feeling. Once again, I realized I was absent-mindedly staring at the lake. At this point, I noticed the cabin almost directly across from me beyond the lake. I'm about as far as I'm going to get from the house during my walk, and all I want to do is be back there with one of my books. As this thought crosses my mind, I notice that a small part of the reflection on the lake is missing. It's just gone, like someone went over it with a Sharpie. So I looked at that spot, focused on it. Of all the bad decisions in my life, that's the one I would wish to take back the most. Even while my Homo sapien brain is trying to assign some reason for this absence of reflection, half sunk boat, thicket of reeds, weird stone outcropping, my lizard brain is telling me to get the hell out of there as fast as I can. The spot is getting bigger. It is something man-shaped, walking out of the water towards me, very clearly walking, backlit by the moon. I'm frozen. I can't move. It's getting close to shore when I realize I still have a flashlight. One of the big ones people in cabins like to keep around. I drop my stick, fumble with a flashlight, not breaking eye contact with this thing. I find the switch, which was right where it should be, under my thumb, but hey, I was panicking, and I shine it at the man shape. Of course, there's nothing there at all. Just water and moonlit reflections all the way back to the cabin. I swear I stood there for 5 minutes, motionless except for my eyes, which were grid searching the entire lake. Finally, I decided I was imagining things. Despite every inch of me still screaming to run, I decided we'll head back the way I came at double speed. I flicked the light switch off just to get my night sight back. And that thing, it was exactly where it would be if it hadn't stopped approaching, right where I had been pointing my light. Close enough now to start obscuring part of the cabin. Literally visible in the dark, but not in the light. I froze for some amount of time, probably only a few seconds, but felt a lot longer. It got closer. Like water moves noiselessly, but regularly you watch reflection on it, and it's just noise. There are no regular waves or anything. It's just a constant shimmer. The edges of this thing were like that. It was hard to notice at first because just the lake was behind my view of it. But as it eclipsed the cabin and some of the ground, I very clearly saw its edges move, just like the lake. Some people have said scribbles, some have said static. I feel like these are synonymous descriptions of what I saw. At about 10 feet, I realized there wasn't going to be any kind of stopping. It wasn't going to stop and say something or resolve itself into some drunk guy or anything I wanted to deal with. So, in lieu of pooping on myself, I dropped the flashlight, heard it break, and sprinted back to the cabin. I felt one skinning my shin pretty rough, but made it back to the cabin in about 10 minutes. I wasn't in that great shape. I got back to the house. My head was pounding, my ears were roaring, nauseous. I stumbled in and collapsed in the downstairs bedroom. This was a two-floor cabin, and my parents were upstairs. They were undisturbed by my noises, and I just collapsed into bed. Then I noticed one of my windows is framing the lake like a painting. Everything just outside the window is pitch black. Moon on the other side of the house. I decided I can't deal with that, so I go back out to the main room and close all the doors and windows I can see and sleep on the sofa. At some point hours later, crashing from the adrenaline, the run, I fell asleep. Next morning, my parents wake me up as they're coming downstairs. They ask me why I was sleeping on the couch, fully clothed, and why my jeans are ripped. I'm too self-conscious at this point to say anything close to the truth, so I just said I fell, lost the flashlight, and had to come back, and just before I fell asleep on the couch, it was just like accidental. They buy it. I didn't sleep well or much at all, so I decided to go to the actual bed and get some sleep. I walked over, opened the door to my room. Lying perfectly aligned on the bed is the broken flashlight, covered in dirt, and the broomstick, side by side like matchsticks. And the windows, they're locked. Next story. My friend's family moved into one of the first houses ever built in our hometown. The house was originally owned by a very rich family that helped settle our town in the mid-1800s. During the Great Depression, the remaining family members ended up selling the house to someone who wanted to turn the house into apartments. The house remained split up as apartments for decades and in the 50s, a young boy drowned in one of the bathtubs in his family's apartment. Shortly after my friend's family moved into the house, we started to notice strange noises while we were working on clearing out old debris, etc. It sounded like little kids running around. If you've ever lived in an apartment with children, you know what this sounds like. We attributed it possibly to vermin in the front of the house. After about 6 months of working on the house, we had to close off the front part of the house because winter had arrived. Most of all the work on the house was at a standstill. It was during this time that we started to notice what sounded like a child singing. It happened almost every day, and after a while we started trying to track down the sound. Eventually we were able to pinpoint that the sound was coming from a long crawl space near the bathroom that would have been between apartments, if they still existed. Unfortunately, no one could fit in the crawl space, and when we resumed work on the house, the sound stopped. Next story. I was a missionary and talking to one of the members of my church, who asked if we could do an exorcism. I raised an eyebrow and asked what the conditions were. She owned a motel near the edge of the small town that was quite popular as it was the only motel for miles around. She had a man rent a room for just the night, asking for a wake-up call around 8 a.m. He seemed agitated and upset, but she figured he might just be stressed from a long drive and so rented the room out to him, and that was that. Next morning, she made the courtesy call, but no answer. He didn't check out either, so she booked the room for another day, as this is a common occurrence in motels. Later that night, nobody had exited the room, so she became concerned. She took the master key and opened the door, immediately wishing she hadn't. The man had killed himself by stabbing himself multiple times in the gut. However, he missed all of his vital organs and so instead bled out painfully and slowly. But during this agonizing pain, he decided to crawl all over the room, leaving blood trails everywhere. She called the police and got the place cleaned up. She kept this quiet with the rest of the staff as the police said the whole thing was under investigation and later reopened the room months later. Whenever she rented out the room, the people would always tell her that the TV was broken. During the night, they would always hear weird sounds coming from the TV, but the TV wasn't on. One family even unplugged the cord, but the sounds kept coming, so they assumed it was mechanical. The maids also refused to clean the room alone. They said that when they were in the room alone, they felt strange and weird, as if some dark presence was watching them from, you guessed it, behind the TV stand. So, she finally decided to ask us missionaries to do an exorcism. She was visibly very spooked. I agreed as the group leader to perform the exorcism that following Sunday, much to the chagrin of the other missionaries who knew that my time as a missionary was up and would be leaving before the end of the week. I saw some crazy stuff as a missionary, and I don't even believe in demonic possessions or evil spirits. This isn't even the half of it. Next story. This happened on the island of Kyushu in a small town, Takachiho. This area of Japan is famous for being the place where a lot of Japanese mythology is thought to have happened. Amaterasu and the cave, for example. Regardless of whether you believe in the mythology, the area is one of the first places the early settlers of the Japanese islands lived thousands of years ago. Let me start this out by saying I'm an agnostic atheist with no prior strange experiences to speak of well into my 20s. So me and my buddy, we're in this town, really just planning to sleep on the streets after seeing all the awesome temples they have around there and getting drunk. My friend, however, being a weenie, was getting cold and convinced me we should stay at a hotel. We found the small grimy business hotel on one of the main streets, and we negotiated a price to spend the night. Did I mention this place was grimy? The stairwell was like walking up a Soviet-era apartment. The rooms were semi-bug infested, but both my friend and I took it in stride and the old innkeeper was nice. We were traveling on the cheap. Anyway, we left for a while to walk around and eat, came back as drunk as we hoped. We even had a couple more beers in the room for good measure. After we were done drinking, we laid out our futons next to each other. That's a traditional Japanese hotel way, and passed out. Sometime in the middle of the night, my friend poked me hard in the back. The room was pretty dark, but the moon was shining through the window and you could pretty much see everything. I rolled over to see what my friend wanted, and he was sitting up in his futon looking down at me, kind of smiling. I asked him groggily what he wanted, and he didn't respond. He just kept smiling. Something was weird. It was something about his face, but I couldn't quite place it. He slowly started to lay back down on the futon, and that's when I realized what I was looking at was not my friend. My friend was next to me sleeping, and this form was what looked like him and seemed to be coming out of his midsection. It continued to lay down, and the form sort of went and then merged with my friend. I was a little freaked out, but also very tired, and I sort of rolled back over thinking, what the hell? Throughout the night, I was poked several more times in the back, but I wasn't able to ignore it. Needless to say, I had a memorable time in Takachiho.